The Browns in the draft are in an interesting place here, because I think there is a expectation that the Browns are going to do and only consider one option, and I think that might not be what the Browns are really considering when you think about it. And that's what I'm here to talk about. We're going to talk about the draft. We're going to talk about some of the stuff on the defense. And we're going to talk about what the expectations for the draft should be. But before I do that, I want to make sure I give a shout out to patreon.com dog check tier members. I'm going to start with Michael Matique, Cam Vex, Jalil Salim Jr. and Sr., Caleb Pickering, Benjamin Woods, Michael Terry, Sam28, Wani Boy, Rob Morehouse, Tyler Chiz, Michael Morales, Mark Kahn, Max Haymaker, Nick Merrick, D.A.J., Joe Hart, Gabriel Wilson, Fred Pat III, David Valtiar, Relentless Buck, Rex Kaufman, Kevin Johnson, Cleveland Cart, Matt H., Sign Sheets, Gemini, Leon Freeman, Fight 3074, Chunt, Yo-Yo, Matt Lloyd, Paul Wilcox, Hondo Magnifico, Kyle Stoffer, Lukey from Munich, Dave Roth, J Guy 101, Musty Taco, Brad Cowbo, Dylan W, James McGinley, Arendal, Chad Gimme, David Maldonado, Josh Spindor, Austin Rich, Mark M, Stuart Moore, Dylan Hill, Cleveland BCI, Robert Germain, Dave Mike May, Andrew Hirsch, Curtis Bear, Batman, Barack Kumar, John Albert, Beerman 069, Masayua, Butts Roland, Mac House, Reeve Hertz, Philip Wilcoxon, Marie Vivert, Sean Barron, Goggles Pisano, Dom Gazzulo, Nick Nasty, Ian Whitaker, Colin 216, Christian, Dave Strong, Michael Stone, Soul Train, Billy, Moose Gentry, Austin Z, Mark Burnett II, Andre Griffin, Otis Wolf, Dog Pound Kai, Greg Ehlers, Austin Bolin, Lydia Mahawk, Alexander Davis, Chris Falms, Picktown Browns backer, Max Neelakenko, Max Al Dojo, and Water Bear Marketing. Again, guys, thank you honestly so much for the support you have given me throughout this year, the offseason, the security you afford me with your Patreon subscriptions really does help keep things afloat here. So again, guys, thank you so much. Now let's get into the video. Okay, so this is an interesting year for the Browns when it comes to the draft, right? Because they have a pretty good pick here when you consider what kind of a draft this is. And this is a draft where it's never bad to have the number one overall pick, but it's kind of wasted to have the number one overall pick because I don't think the difference in prospect that you're going to get from having the 1 or 2 or 3rd overall pick is really that different than what you're going to get at 13 or 14, right? I think it's a deep draft, but not a top heavy or loaded draft. Like, I don't think there's a consensus star that everybody's like 100% sure is going to go number 1. Like some people think Kyle Hamilton should go in the top 5. Some people think Aiden Hutchinson should be the number 1 overall pick, but I don't think there's a consensus yet on who that guy is. And when you're in that situation, it's pretty good to have the picks in the middle, right? Because that means that you're probably going to get a very good player that falls to you. Now, this year, most of the talk about the draft has focused on the wide receivers for a couple of reasons, I feel. One, the Browns' offense been awful. Specifically, their passing offense has been awful. 2, there's no quarterbacks to focus on in this draft, right? If there were a good crop of quarterbacks, I think that would be a more pressing conversation for a lot of people. But since the best quarterback we're talking about, like let me go to PFF right now and see what their highest ranking quarterback is in this draft class. And I don't think it's even somebody they gave a first round grade to. But it's just not really a sexy conversation right now because, well, there's really nobody hot to talk about, right? It's Kenny Pickett, and he's the 18th ranked prospect via PFF, and he's a redshirt senior, which, you know, means he's going to be older. Also, they're 10s. I'm not trying to discriminate against redshirt seniors, but usually the high ceiling guys, they don't stay into their redshirt senior year of college. It's usually kind of a red flag when it comes to potential there. Not saying you can't be successful in the NFL and be a redshirt senior, but the world we live in, most guys with high ceilings go out their junior year or redshirt junior or maybe true senior year, but not redshirt senior. So that's a little bit of a concern, not like a deal breaker or anything, but it's a little bit of a concern there. But yeah, when we look at this draft, I think we're focusing on wide receiver because of those factors. Also, I think the biggest one of the biggest factors is that Ohio State has like 3 wide receivers or 2 wide receivers that can be drafted in the first round this year, right, with Chris Olave and Garrett Wilson. I think Garrett Wilson's consensus the best prospect out of both of them. Chris Olave seems to be the second guy there. There's a couple of guys from Alabama. There's a guy from Georgia. There's Drake London out in USC. This seems like the 2014 draft, right? A draft class where the first overall pick, was Jadeveon Clowney. But like the 12th was Aaron Donald, right? And Odell Beckham was around there. Like, it seems like one of those draft class where you're going to be able to get a solid player if you pick within the first round, basically, because it seems like it's going to be that deep of a class there, especially at wide receiver. So I think a lot of people have focused in on wide receiver. I think that's fair. But I don't know if I'm 100% convinced if the Browns, A, are going to go with a wide receiver, and B, if that's even the right move. Not saying that I would be upset if they draft a wide receiver, but there are some things that does preclude me from watching a wide receiver that early. One of those things is it tends to be, at least from my perspective, now if I'm wrong, you can correct me in the comments as always, but it seems to be from my perspective that it's a lot harder to find a good wide receiver in the draft when you don't really have a long-term quarterback, right? And right now, the Browns don't know what their long-term quarterback situation is, whether you love Baker or not. Nobody's talking about like giving him a 5-year extension right now, right? So we don't really know what the long-term solution is going to be at quarterback. Some people hope it's going to be Baker Mayfield, but we don't know if it's going to be Baker Mayfield. And that's something to consider, right? Like a lot of the situations where you see wide receivers come off the slow starts or wide receivers not really reach their potential or what you think their potential is going to be. It's usually situations where they go to a team with a bad quarterback or a unanswered quarterback situation. And that's what the Cleveland Browns have right now. I mean, we're talking about bringing guys in for competition at the very least. So that tells you we don't have a set quarterback situation. And that's not a great place to develop a wide receiver. I know people are going to want to scream, hey, Jamar Chase, but Jamar Chase had Joe Burrow, somebody who was not only familiar with LSU, but Joe Burrow, he's playing like one of the top 10 quarterbacks this year. So that being said, and there's also another thing to consider with Baker Mayfield, if he's going to be the quarterback next year, and that's who we go into the draft as the quarterback. Baker's best 2 years have been without wide receivers that are that great. We talk about 2018 was a really good year for him, right? Didn't have the greatest wide receivers in the world. He had Jarvis Landry, who was pretty good. But other than that, it was like Rashad Perriman, Derek Willis, Rashard Higgins. Like, these aren't great wide receivers that other teams are jumping to get other than like Jarvis Landry. And in 2020, he really didn't start to shine until after Odell got hurt. Jarvis was hurt most of the year. I think he didn't get his first touchdown until the Jacksonville game that year. So you were really relying on Donovan Peoples-Jones and Rashard Higgins, who, we've seen what they do in extended snaps this year. They're not the greatest wide receivers in the world. They're, I think Donovan Peoples-Jones has some potential, but, he's not there yet. Rashard Higgins, I think he's Rashard Higgins. He's a solid 4th or 5th option on your wide receiving core, but I don't think he's a 2. And herein lies the problem, right? When you've had healthy wide receivers for this team, 2019 and 2021, right? Where you had a healthy Odell, in 2019 as well, and you had a healthy Jarvis Landry. It's just the production has not been great from the quarterback position, and that makes me wonder, like, if you get a better wide receiver, if you get the best wide receiver in this draft, how much better is that really going to make this offense? Yeah, I have to ask that question. I'm not saying I have a definitive answer here or I'm definitive anywhere in this argument. I'm just wondering, like, how much better is a wide receiver really going to make this offense when quarterback play has been a concern last year, at least. Now, if you're going into this thinking, hey, quarterback play is not even going to be an issue, we're going to get top 10 quarterback play next year, that's optimistic and, good on you. But I don't necessarily think that it's a guarantee that we're going to get that by any means. And if it's not, it makes you kind of wary about getting a player who can only be utilized if your quarterback's firing on all cylinders, or, to some people's account, like if he's healthy, right? Like that's a concern when you're talking about a first round pick, right? So there's that. There's also the factor in of like, what if the Browns take a wide receiver? It's not Garrett Wilson. Will people lose their mind? Probably, but I think AB has built enough trust to where people will like give that a chance, right? This isn't like Ray Farmer picking a player over somebody from Ohio State. This is Andrew Berry's had some really good picks here. Some picks that we didn't necessarily think he should have went with, but, turned out to be right. I think that Jacob Phillips won over Malik Harrison. People were upset about that, right, when it happened. That looks good right now, right? Jacob Phillips looks good right now. So we'll see what happens there. There's also the question of, hey, the Browns have other needs, right? And I know defensively it's a strength, but they're looking at trying to retain Clowney. We'll see where they're at with that. They're looking at filling one of those defensive tackle spots, right? I think you're going to try to keep Malik McDowell, and you're going to try to keep Clowney, and then, you got to find another defensive tackle. Yeah, you drafted Togiai last year. I think Togiai flashed in some spots, but I also don't think Togiai has the size to anchor, especially next to Malik McDowell, who's more of a pass rushing defensive tackle. And then Jordan Elliott, he's just not had the type of years that you would want him to have to feel comfortable with him taking any kind of responsibility in that defensive tackle room. Which brings me to, hey, at 13, I know it's not sexy to go defensive tackle at 13, but it is a need. And there is a player that I think is going to be pretty good at defensive tackle in Jordan Davis. Now, I don't know where the draft boards have him at necessarily. He could be one of those guys who are low on the draft boards because he doesn't like have a great spark score or whatever. But Jordan Davis is an excellent defensive tackle. I think he's big enough to be a great run defender in the NFL. I also he's clearly big enough. I think he's fast enough to also live in a 4-3 if you really need him to live in a 4-3. I don't think he's somebody who can only be a nose tackle in the NFL. I think he can live in a 4-3, kind of similar to how Danny Shelton had traits to where he was fast enough to live in a 4-3, and he has lived in a 4-3, played pretty well there as a run defender. So I would be interested in something along those lines. And also, let's not consider, like, if they don't get a wide receiver in the first round, I don't think that's it for wide receiver, right? I think there's an opportunity here to come back around in the second round and really go at a crop of really good players. Chris Olave is somebody I think is very interesting as a second-round prospect. He's an early second-round prospect, so you might want to move up late into the first round to get him if that's your plan. John Mechie is an interesting prospect because of the injury. He's probably going to fall into the second round or late first round. Jamison Williams is another interesting prospect because of an injury. He's probably going to fall a little bit further than he wants to. And maybe he doesn't, right? Because he put up great numbers. The ACL injury isn't what it used to be. It's about an 8-month recovery. So we're talking about he got hurt January. He could probably be back before the season starts, right? Jamison Williams, because that's just the timeline for ACL injuries has just moved up so fast. When I saw the injury, I was scared to get a Achilles injury, but it didn't turn out to be that severe. There's Treylon Burks, a big wide receiver out of Arkansas. David Bell, there's a ton of guys. George Pickens is somebody I mentioned earlier. Like, there are a ton of like really good wide receivers this year coming out. And I don't think Andrew Berry is going to limit himself to only thinking he can get a good wide receiver in the first round. Now, is this the question of, do you want a good wide receiver or the best wide receiver? That's a question, right? Also, the other question you have to ask about that is how much. I know when we talk about bad quarterback play, we think that more wide receivers and better wide receivers can elevate it. But what we have seen in 4 years with Baker Mayfield hasn't really reflected that. Now, I don't know if that's like an indictment on the whole argument, but it hasn't reflected that over the last 4 years, where Baker's best years has not been with his best wide receiving help. And if that's the case, if you're not sure if that's going to raise the ceiling, how much are you willing to put into that? And also, how great can a wide receiver be if he's not getting adequate quarterback play? And we know Baker can provide adequate quarterback play at times, but we also know that sometimes he dips below what's adequate in the NFL. He had the 27th ranked QBR this year. That is horribly low. That's not adequate at all, quarterback play. And is a wide receiver really going to be able to fix that? I don't know. We'll see. I think a lot of what the Browns are going to do at wide receiver is going to depend on what the Browns do at quarterback or what they feel at quarterback. If they really do like jive with what they said publicly, if they think Baker's going to be the guy, we're going to bring him back next year, he's going to be great, we're looking forward to it. If that's what they're thinking, okay, yeah, they'll draft a wide receiver more than likely, right? Because in that situation, you think a wide receiver can enhance an already good quarterback. If they don't think that, right? If they don't think they have a long-term answer at quarterback or an adequate answer at quarterback, and they don't do anything to fix that, one, that's horrible. Two, I don't know if you bring in a wide receiver in that situation because the numbers don't suggest that it's going to go your way when it comes to developing a wide receiver if you don't feel like you have adequate quarterback play. Also, maybe they bring in somebody else and that changes the math on the wide receivers, right? Where you might think you need less at wide receiver or you can get away with less because you brought in somebody who can be really good at quarterback. I think that answer at wide receiver is going to hinge on quarterback more than people are kind of anticipating right now. And I think there's some other prospects that are quite interesting for the Browns at 13, other than some wide receivers. We'll see what happens here. I think this is an interesting conversation to have. I think I'm probably going to change my mind by the time we get to the draft because things are going to change, right? More information is going to become available, but I think it's an interesting conversation to have right now. But that's it for me. Let me know what you think in the comment section down below. But again, guys, thank you for watching. Have a great day. Have a good night.